Greetings, this is Griff Ruby, the Nostalgic Catholic, with a somewhat different review. Time to kind of break the pattern of all these short stories, although this is also kind of a collection of short stories, but we'll get about that shortly. So, this is a rather unusual book by Isaac Asimov. It's all named Azazel after this little 2-centimeter high pocket demon that this figure named George carries about with him. And before we start, what kind of demonology is this? It's really irrelevant. The point of it is kind of these wish fulfillment kind of things. It could have been a fairy godmother, or even just a fairy, or a good luck fairy, or a genie that comes out of a lamp, or what have you. And you get so many wishes or whatever. And in this case, George gets as many wishes as he wants, but they have to be things that don't benefit him. So they have to be things that are for other people in some way. That's the only condition. But he can do as many as he wants, and so every time he does somebody, that somebody gets the results of the wish. And okay, that allows us to be introduced to a whole bunch of different characters. Each story, each episode, if you will, a story, introduces us to another character. Anyway, any person can only receive the effect of one such wish, which of course also means you don't get a second wish to undo it if they find that it doesn't work out, which is what ends up happening virtually all the time. And I think maybe the nearest thing to an exception, it just kind of amounts to George was hoping that somebody would remunerate him for making something happen because he said he would, and he totally forgets that commitment as he goes on to live happily ever after because the wish just plain old actually worked for him as desired, but worked for the other person as that other person desired, and George gets nothing out of it, so that still didn't work. But in most cases, the person blessed with the wish, it ends up not being a blessing. It's like all those wish fulfillment stories. You wish for money and someone you love dies and leaves it to you, and it's like, that's horrible. Or you wish for power, you wish to be president, and suddenly you're Abraham Lincoln at the Ford Theater about to be shot. Those kinds of pranks where the wish is granted, but it has effects that don't work out very well in one way or another. Now, this book, Azazel, is the result of a series of short stories. They all feature this little Azazel demon, but they're not all in this book. Apparently, probably enough for the better part of another book has since been written. These stories, so far as I know, are gathered up in another book called Magic, which has those and a variety of other different, more fantasy-type stories from the tail end of Isaac Asimov's life. Companion to another book titled Gold, which kind of gathers up some late science fiction stuff. And finally, the Black Widowers. There's still several tales that hadn't been put in a book before, and those are gathered up in what is generally considered the last book of Isaac Asimov fiction, the last new book, all issued posthumously. Yeah, well, I remember how that's said. Posthumously was, I think, called The Return of the Black Widowers, which has some key stories from the past that are particularly popular or well received, and then a few new ones that, well, they had been published in the magazines in various places, but never gathered into a Black Widowers book. So between that and the other ones issued while he was alive, you basically get all the Black Widowers stories. According to this book, the introduction explains how these things got started. Apparently, there's a couple of proto-Azazel-like stories that are not in here. So if you really wanted to be complete, you'd have to track those down if they've been published. I haven't researched whether they are or not. But this book, plus you'd have to get Magic, and then you'd have all of Azazel, as far as I know. I think that would be all of it. Probably the worst thing to fare is the Union Club mysteries. You have the one book of those, a bunch of others have come out. Again, enough to fill the better part of another book. They've never been gathered up. You just got to find different magazines. Uh, some of them like girly, gallery magazine. No thanks, no thanks. Maybe send me a Xerox of the one page the story is on. I don't. That's one artifact I don't want. I'm not into that at all. So I don't know what we're going to do with the Union Club mysteries. I mean, I'm not going to hold up a piece of gallery. This is where Isaac Asimov first published this Union Club mystery where Griswold solves this. Not going to happen. But anyway, Azazel appears as a bunch of stories. They have a list of exactly where the various Azazel stories were published in their original form, and sometimes with original titles that are somewhat different. I have to admit, call it human weakness or whatever, when it gets to these later stories, I don't think I'm really so keen on trying to drill into all the original places they were published and then comparing that against how they appear in their final form, which by this point, any changes, if they're not typographical, I just not up to drilling into, and probably for the most part they would be typographical, or maybe giving the new title. So at this point, so I probably, if I ever get to the Black Widowers, I expect I'll be handling it the same way. Just look at the book where they're all collected and just do the stories. For the earlier eras of the 30s, 40s, 50s, and into the 60s, and maybe a trickling of other stories since, yeah, it's kind of neat to do where they originally made their appearance. So that said, Azazel this book has a number of interesting stories. Now, a special one was written for this book. It's the only one that's not in any magazine somewhere else, called The 2-Centimeter Demon, the first one. Asimov wrote this basically as a way of introducing George. George is like, Asimov is like, I'm myself, but I never say myself. I'm just me. I'm the narrator. I'm an unnamed narrator. But I know this guy named George, and George has this 2-centimeter high demon. And George ends up meeting up with these various people with these various problems. And he tells me about how he got his demon to try to help him. This and that happened. And so this first chapter is basically how he came to meet him. It's not too interesting. One Night of Thought. First one of the stories that are from magazines before. Okay. Somebody wished to be able to sing. But the wish had to be temporary. It had to be, basically 3 hours of just being able to sing awesomely, beautifully, flawlessly. So the wish is granted. The singing is done. And then they lose it again. And as I'm reading that story, I'm realizing it sounds familiar. Because one of those early Asimov stories, and one of the lesser known ones, The Secret Sense. Yes, I did an episode on that, in my series of Asimov stories. Asimov wrote it, couldn't sell it, gave it away, and then was persuaded to get the guy to either pay him $5 or publish it under a pseudonym, because he was worried that people would say anybody who gives stories should be blackballed, and when you're struggling on, that's the last thing you want to hear. Get worried about being blackballed, blacklisted. That was it, not blackballed. You get blacklisted. Oh boy. So that's how the story met its public. It was in a tiny magazine called Cosmic Stories, which ran for 3 issues and ran out because basically when you have to get the stories people give out for free, or $5 in the case of Asimov, the quality is rather poor, and people didn't buy enough to keep it going. So, and here we have the same thing. For this brief time, you have this awesome, beautiful, incredible thing, and then suddenly it's over. And after that, it's like, then he's like blind from birth. For 3 hours, you can see. and all that there was to see, all the colors and shapes and wonder that surrounded us all, and we pay no attention to because we're so used to it. Imagine you could see it its full glory for just 3 hours, and then be blind again. Blind! Yeah, imagine being able to see those things that the Martian in the secret sense could see for however long, and then you lose that sense and it cannot be revived. You are forever blind. Smile that loses. So this lady loves the guy. The guy's away a lot. She wants to kind of be able to treasure her, but she doesn't have any really good picture of him. And all she wishes for is just a really good picture of him, with this captivating smile. The wish is granted. Here's this picture. It's flawless. It's gorgeous. She loves this picture more than the guy himself, in fact. Well, I think he even ends up leaving her. He's leaving her because she likes the picture better than the guy. To the victor. You got this guy who can't get a girl. Magically, he can. All of a sudden, the girls are all over, and no, that's not the paradise you think it is, because they start fighting each other. And sooner or later, somebody, in this case, a girl with a whole bunch of brothers that are very strong, dominates. She takes a fancy to him, and, well, that's how it's going to be. Like it or love it. You're stuck with it. The dim rumble. Let's see, this is kind of a hard one to explain here. Somebody wants to create a sonic wavelength that would, with proper force, bathe the earth in sonic vibrations that will, in a matter of a day or so, or take time for the sound to travel, wipe out humanity while scarcely touching other life forms. So, obviously something went astray and it didn't work. Well, I think what it was is that worst that might happen is that human beings will all be wiped out. Just human beings. It's not as though they're people, but it becomes one of these things where randomly it might happen at any time. You don't know when. And when could be any time or no time or whatever. So it ends up being kind of innocuous. Somebody wanted to save humanity, and he ends up destroying his own life, but hey, humanity is saved in some manner from some particular catastrophe. And I mean, it just goes on. The story again. There's a lot of that involve love. One guy wished that he had no problem walking through the snow, so he gets the wish granted. He can just glide right on top of the snow. But glide is what he does. He has very little control over. He can't just stop. He just glide until he realizes he has to decide not to glide, and then he'll fall through and be just like normal. He'll probably fall over in the snow. But that's what he needs to do. So he ends up deciding that was neat, but it's just too weird. I'm not going to use it, and so that's the end of that. I guess that's about as healthy as you can come from one of those wishes. But most of them seem to involve affairs of the heart. Somebody wishes somebody else would love them, or you have this guy and this girl. They're both kind of, unattractive, homely people. And even though they're both that way, the girl thinks he's handsome. The guy thinks she's beautiful. But they're really just both homely, and I don't know, they're just beautiful because they belong to each other. That's all. But at any rate, she's thinking, I wish I could look better for my guy, and she gets the wish. And she gets better nicely, smoothly, gradually, no abrupt changes where she's not recognized for who she is. But because of these slow, gradual changes, she kind of starts finding she can attract guys that really are attractive. Not just this guy that, just attracted that somebody noticed her at all. Now kind of, he's old and fat and balding and very boring character, actually, and not much to track. And suddenly he's not so attractive anymore. So that ends up destroying that marriage, or just different things go wrong, and that's kind of the motif. The idea is, you get a wish fulfillment, and the magic wand is waved, and things don't work out as planned, and that's kind of the, if you want to call it, the moral in the story. Things do not work out as planned. So it was fun though to read an Asimov book I had not read before. The last time I had anything new was when I did Fantastic Voyage, the second one. So, on the whole, I find this better than Fantastic Voyage, even if the way things kind of fall apart. The only thing that's enjoyable is watching some of the creative ways that things fall apart. It's not like the little demon is deliberately sabotaging things. He's simply granting the wish as given, and the wish has effects that the person really should have been able to predict, but didn't. So, anyway, it's been a fun, light read, and I'm kind of pleased to have at last read something new by Asimov that I hadn't read before. Thanks for listening.